what happened on yesterday, you can't make your today strong. You understand what I'm saying? The only way that you will not fall into the same snare today is you must understand how you fell yesterday. You don't know how you fell. Trust me, you will fall again. Look at the person next to you and say, we better learn from our mistakes. What is the modern day slave patrol? It's called the police department. America's police departments, believe it or not, brothers and sisters, actually grew out of what was called the slave patrol system.
What's up YouTube family, welcome back to my space. This is Evans Rayola. Guys, on today's video we want to talk about slavery and the modern day form of slavery that we black folks don't tend to notice. And to speak to us today is Dr. Ray Huggins in a topic he titled, When Did You Stop Being Slaves? Dr. Ray Huggins is a former Christian pastor turned historian and lecturer. He has spoken extensively on African history, religion, and psychological effects of slavery. His lecture titled, When Did You Stop Being Slaves? Is a thought-provoking discussion on mental and cultural enslavement, emphasizing that physical slavery may have ended, but psychological and systemic forms of oppression persist. He argues that many people remain mentally enslaved due to religious indoctrination, misinformation about history, and societal conditioning. His message encourages critical thinking, self-education, and empowerment to break free from these mental chains. So guys, I want you to watch this video of Dr. Ray Huggins talking about this topic. Once the video is done, we will get back and do a critical analysis about the same. Let's watch this together, guys.
The subject for today is entitled, When Did You Stop Being a Slave? I said, ask the person next to you that question. Look at him and say, when did you stop being a slave? Now, most people probably say, well, I ain't never been no slave. We need to ask you that question again. Because, believe it or not, brothers and sisters, to grow up in the cultural environment that we grew up in this country, and not just this country, Europe has expanded its influential borders all over the world. To grow up under the domination of a culture that is not yours means that you are a slave to that culture until you've been liberated from that culture. One of the things that I think will help us in understanding this message today is perhaps we need to define what a slave is. Now, let me just see by a show of hands. Before I go any further, let me do a survey right quick, a one mass survey. How many of you here is a slave? All right, got hands up. Okay, put your hands down. How many of you feel that you are not a slave? Got hands up. All right. Well, after I go through this definition, I'm going to ask that question again. And let's see if your answer still remains the same. The definition of a slave. What is a slave? A slave is a human being who is owned as property by another and is absolutely subject to the will of his or her owner. Okay? Some of you say, no, I don't fit that one. Let me share something with you that y'all may not know. The original, now notice what I'm saying, the original purpose or meaning of the marriage was a certificate of ownership. Y'all know that, did you? The certificate of marriage means that you are my property. I'll read the definition again. A slave is a human being who is owned as property by another and is absolutely subject to the will of his or her owner. That's not the end of the definition. Next part of the definition is a slave is a bond servant divested of all freedom and personal rights. Another part of the definition, check this part out now, listen carefully. A slave is someone who is completely dominated by an influence, a habit, a person, an entity, or a system. I'll read that one again. Somebody says, uh-oh, I think that one got me. A slave is someone who is completely dominated by an influence, a habit, a person, an entity, or a system. For example, if you're in the military, you're a slave. Because this entity called the military completely dominates you, and you are subject to the will of the government. If you work for the police department, you're a slave. Same thing. If you work for some big company that tells you when you better report to work. Like it or not, brothers and sisters, you're a slave. A slave is a person who is actuated and controlled by another. Come on and be honest. How many times you don't feel like going to work? And you end up going, don't you? You don't want to go. You really don't want to go. In fact, you don't want to go so bad, you're developing a serious attitude right about now. But you go, don't you? Because you are under the control of that other entity. Now I ask you again, are you a slave? In 1839, a brother by the name of Yusuf Sink, who was an African prince, was kidnapped by European oppressors and placed aboard a ship along with 52 other black Africans. And the ship was bound for Havana, Cuba. During the journey, these Africans came together as one unit. Even though they were from different tribes, on that slave ship they put their tribal differences aside and unified themselves and organized a revolt. Let me tell you what they did. They killed the captain and the entire crew except for 2 white crewmen named Ruiz and Montez. Sink seized control of the ship and ordered the 2 white crewmen to turn the ship around and take it back to where you stole us from, which was Africa. However, the 2 young men were able to underhandedly maneuver the ship in a different direction, and it came toward America. The ship was spotted off the coast of Long Island, and the Africans, along with their leader, Yosef Sink, were captured and taken to port in Connecticut, where they were put in prison. Now, mind you, Sink did not know how to speak English too well, but he chose to speak in his own defense at his trial, in his own language, which was the Mindi language. But here's what amazes me, because see, you got to understand, this was an African prince. It was something about the way he carried himself, that even though he couldn't speak English, he stood in this Connecticut courtroom and presented his case to the judge with such African dignity that the judge was moved to free them and let them return to Africa. In case you don't know about this story, it was portrayed in a movie called Amistad. This situation raised the question: if an African was captured to be sold into slavery but escaped to free territory, was he still legally a slave? That's the question that came from that situation. Well, believe it or not, brothers and sisters, not long after this, there was a man by the name of Dred Scott.
Yes.
And the Dred Scott decision answered that question. Dred Scott, a young slave, and guess where he was from? Right here, Missouri. Traveled to Illinois with his slave master. Years later, while the two were still living in free territory, because Illinois was considered free territory, Scott's slave master died. He left his estate, including his slave, Dred Scott, in the hands of his wife. And Scott insisted that since his residence in a free state made him a free man, that he was no longer a slave. Y'all following this? So Scott brought a lawsuit against his slave master's wife. And it was a very widely publicized case. But I want you to understand this. The Supreme Court ruled that Scott was to remain a slave even though he had become a free man. Did y'all hear what I just said? The Supreme Court ruled that Scott was to remain a slave even though he had become a free man. How secure is your freedom? In the case of Dred Scott versus Sanford decision of 1857, the Supreme Court ruled, and I want y'all to hear these words because it's a quote from the court transcripts, that, and I quote, "A black man has no rights a white man is bound to respect." End of quote. Did y'all hear what I said?
Yes, sir. I heard what you said.
Now, what kind of court is that? That would come to such a ruling. And guess what, brothers and sisters? The Supreme Court just reinforced that ruling a few months ago in what was called the elections. They acted the same thing out all over again. A black man, black folk don't have any rights that a white man is bound to respect. All these black folk, we got the right to vote, we got the right to vote. They showed you, didn't they? Come on, talk to me. They showed you. You don't have the right to do nothing because they went ahead with their and put this blank in office. This decision has been viewed by historians as one of the most ill-conceived decisions by a Supreme Court justice. Let me show you how this concept, a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. Let me show you how this still plays out today. Everybody say the modern day slave patrol. Now, the only way, brothers and sisters, that I know to foster accurate African liberation. Did y'all hear how I said that?
Yes.
The only way I know to foster accurate African liberation is to educate you to our story. To educate you to what really happened on yesterday. Because as long as you don't know what happened on yesterday, you can't make your today strong. You understand what I'm saying? The only way that you will not fall into the same snare today is you must understand how you fell yesterday. You don't know how you fell, trust me, you will fall again. Look at the person next to you and say, we better learn from our mistakes. What is the modern day slave patrol? It's called the police department. America's police departments, believe it or not, brothers and sisters, actually grew out of what was called the slave patrol system. Come on. You see, many years ago, before the slave patrol system came into effect, up until that time, justice was administered by local sheriffs and deputies and marshals. But after the Revolutionary War, most states developed some type of militia in case armed soldiers were needed for national defense. But the institution of slavery, what did I just say? The institution of what? Slavery. The institution of slavery required that some type of organized law enforcement would have to be instituted on a regular basis for the purpose of protecting white slave owners against the uprising of their black slaves. Are y'all following this thing here? There's a book called From Slavery to Freedom by Franklin, and in this book on page 142, Franklin describes how the slave patrols worked. I encourage you to get this book. Notice what he says, and I quote, "One of the devices set up to enforce the slave codes and thereby maintain the institution of slavery was the slave patrol." Counties were usually divided into beats, You know, like a police officer says, I'm walking my beat. Or areas of patrol. And check this out now. And white men were called upon to serve for a period of time, 1, 3, or 6 months. These patrols had 3 responsibilities. Now follow these responsibilities well. The first responsibility of the slave patrol was to apprehend slaves who were out of place and return them to their masters or lock them in jail. What did I just say? Out of place, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The second duty was to visit unannounced slave quarters and search for various kinds of weapons that might be used in an uprising. We call it a raid today. The third purpose of the slave patrol was to visit assemblies of slaves, unannounced, where disorder might develop or where conspiracies for uprising would be planned. That was the job of the slave patrol. The patrol system literally gave every white person authority over every black person, whether the black person was free or a slave. Well, what do we mean by the modern day patrol system? Well, brothers and sisters, today, all over the country, the conditions are the same as back then. Follow what I'm telling you. Police officers today regularly, whenever they get ready, will stop black motorists, particularly young black male motorists, demanding to see their driver's license with the same threatening air of authority that the old slave patrollers demanded to see the passes of the slaves. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying? And if you don't have your driver's license, just like back then, if you didn't have your pass, you were arrested or given a summons or returned back to your master. Oh, this is some deep stuff. When did you stop being a slave? And I hope this message gets out to my people so they can see the program and begin to do something about it. There's another entity at work in our society. It's called the housing projects. Look at the person next to you and say, the projects is designed to prepare you for jail. Can I talk African liberation here today? Now, although many institutions profit from the menace of drugs and crime, in order to keep it from destroying white America, the powers that be decided that it must be contained within the black community, which itself must be contained in order to be controlled. Now follow this, brothers and sisters. I'm not just telling you some stuff that I'm thinking here.
No, come on with it.
Let me show you what I'm talking about. In the year 1945, what year did I say, y'all? 1945. Right. Now see, young people, some of y'all have got to do black history reports in school. If you want, I'll give you my notes. Okay? And you can read this for your black history report. In 1945, the 79th Congress's subcommittee on urban affairs of the Joint Committee issued a report which had the solution to the problem of containing the Negroes. The Joint Committee studied ways that black people could be contained in crowded living conditions and not spread out into the surrounding community. Their conclusion was published in a pamphlet entitled Urban America, Goals and Problems. And I quote from the pamphlet, and here's what it says. The main problem for us with the enclaves, and I like the way they use words that they know most of our folk don't know what the meaning of it is. So let me tell you what an enclave is. An enclave, E-N-C-L-A-V-E, is a minority culture group living as an entity within a larger group. Did you catch that? An enclave is a minority culture group living as an entity within a larger group. So what they're calling the enclave is black folk living in white America.
Yes.
So it goes on to say the main problem for us with the enclaves as it is now placed in the sinks. Now that's deep, because the sinks, S-I-N-K-S, when we think sinks, we think something in our kitchen. Follow what I'm saying? But here, the word sinks means an area that has been designed. Hear what I'm telling you. An area that has been designed to foster moral filth and corruption. So these people have been placed in areas that have been designed to foster moral filth and corruption. Goes on to say, when the Negro population increases at a rate that the enclave is unable to convert them, only two choices remain. And here's what they said. One is territorial growth. In other words, give them more land, or overcrowding. It goes on to read, apart from letting sinks or these areas designed to foster moral filth and corruption, apart from letting these sinks run its course and destroy the city, there is an alternative solution. And here's what they say. Pre-pack, ain't that deep? It actually has the word pre-pack in this document. Pre-pack or introduce design features that will counteract out undesired effects of the sink. In other words, create an environment that will foster violence and destruction among a people within that contained environment without it spreading out into the community. A study by a pathologist named Charles Southwick discovered that certain mice could tolerate high cage densities. So to increase the density in a rat population and maintain healthy specimen, three things were required. Everybody say this with me. The first was to put them in boxes where they can't see each other. That was the first part of the experiment. Second part was to clean their cages. The third part is give them enough to eat. Now this is what these pathologists found was necessary for mice to live in a crowded, packed environment without turning on each other.
Fam, when did you stop being a slave? We are all slaves in one form or the other. It could be through the culture that we have inherited from the white supremacists. The culture we've inherited from the Caucasian man. Because many a times, most of the cultures that we follow today are not our own genuine cultures. There are cultures that we've adopted from the Caucasian. Dr. Ray Hagen says to grow up in the cultural environment, like in America, a culture that is not yours, means that you're a slave to that culture. Until you have been liberated from that culture, you must be a slave. Fam, the culture that right now we are living in is not ours. We are slaves, you know, of the supremacist, the white man. We've always been slaves. Look at us just abandoning our history, being taught about ourselves. You know, the first place where we must start from before we solve this issue of slavery, the modern day slavery, we must first go back to our history. Because the white supremacists lied to our forefathers and told them a lot of things that were lies about themselves. They also came up, you know, with Christianity, the religion. They also lied to them so that they were able to manipulate them. The Caucasian figured out that the easiest way to manipulate a black man could be through religion. What is right and what is wrong. This is a thing that black folks had even before the coming of the Europeans, before the coming of the missionaries. But then they used that to our disadvantage. They lied to us about our history. They created a history for us and made us believe in it. So many a times when we want to solve this issue of the modern day slavery, we tend to be struggling because they started this slavery by lying to us. So the only way we can be able to solve this issue is by knowing our roots. You know, there is no tree that can bear fruits without its roots. And Dr. Ray Hagen proceeds to ask this question: who is a slave? Guys, comment down below, let me know. Who is a slave according to you? Do you believe that we black folks are actually free from bondage? You're actually free from slavery? That we are free men after the physical slavery ended? Who is a slave? A slave is a human being who is owned as property of another and is absolutely subject to the will of his or her owner. A slave is someone who's completely dominated by an influence, a habit, a person, an entity, or a system. Could we say that people who are employed and report to an entity, to a company, are slaves to the company? Could we say that in this case? A slave is a person who is controlled by another. Sometimes you don't want to go to work, but you end up going because you're under the control of an entity. Dr. Ray Hagen proceeds to give us a story of these black people who are being shipped overseas. They were slaves. But on their way, they managed to come together and formed opposition and were able to beat the white men who were trying to ship them. Then only two of them remained, and they lied to them. And they told these two white people who remained, I want you guys to return us back to Africa. But you know how complicated the waters are. The guys instead took a route to the Americas. Upon arrival, these guys were arraigned in court. And one of them pleaded not guilty and tried to speak. And people have been asking questions. Does it mean that a servant, or rather a slave, who's escaped and went on a free land, does he remain to be free now? If an African was captured to be sold into slavery but escaped to free territory, was he still legally a slave? Scott went to a free state with his master who died there, and he said since he was a free man, he was no longer a slave. But the Supreme Court ruled against him. They say that Scott was to remain a slave even though he had become a free man. The Supreme Court ruled a black man has no rights. A white man is bound to respect. Family, do you know how deep and dirty that is? That a white man is bound to respect, well, that black man, he has no rights. The Supreme Court reinforced the same thing with voting. The modern day slave patrol, the only way I know to foster accurate African liberation is to educate us about our story. We must educate each other about our story. That way we can be able to find liberation in the modern day slavery. The only way we can be able to fight it is through knowledge about our history. We first must know our past to be able to solve our future. That's the ultimate goal that we must have as black folk. As long as you don't know what happened yesterday, you cannot make your tomorrow stronger or today. We better learn from our mistakes. The modern day slave patrol, the American police department, grew out of the slave patrol system. Family, look at the American police department and what they've been doing. Fam, for us to be able to solve these issues, we must know our history. We must be people who are willing to learn from our past, be able to solve past mistakes for us to be able to grow further, to grow ahead. So guys, let me know what you think about this video by Dr. Ray Hagen, speaking about whether or not we are still slaves as black folks. Guys, comment down below. Let me know what you think about the video. Like this video so that it can be recommended to other YouTube users, and I'll be so grateful. And in a special way, I just want to thank you guys because you've been consuming my content well in this week, and I'm so grateful. And I'd want to imagine that you all are sharing my work, you all are liking it. That's why it's being recommended to more and more people. The goal of the channel has always been to tell black stories all over the world, in Africa and in the diaspora. Guys, let us come together and change the black community all over the world. Thank you guys, and kindly do consider subscribing to the channel. We are currently on the road to 50,000 subscribers, and we cannot do it without your support. Thank you, and see you all in my next episode. Goodbye.